please. Well, welcome to the Kennedy School of Government and to John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. We appreciate your flexibility. The weather was not under our control, but we're pleased certainly to have General Casey here and to have made the effort to come up. I am Tad Olstrom, and on behalf of the Kennedy School, I'd like to express how privileged we are to have all of you here tonight, and privileged as well to have the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. My role is to moderate, so momentarily I'll turn the podium and the mic over to Lieutenant Colonel John Teahan, who will do the introduction of our guest speaker this evening. John is a National Security Fellow right here at the Kennedy School, and he will formally introduce General Casey, who will then make some introductory remarks for 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to what I am sure will be the much anticipated question and answer session. Lieutenant Colonel Teahan is a veteran of the conflict in Iraq, is a representative of today's talented, dedicated, and well-educated military officer. He's a graduate of the United States Military Academy, Rhodes Scholar, White House Fellow, permanent representative of the Council on Foreign Relations, former professor of political science at the Military Academy, and recently a commander of an armored battalion in Al Anbar province, Iraq. John is spending his last day as a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. General Casey has submitted to do a promotion ceremony tomorrow morning for John, where he gets to take off those lieutenant colonel leaves and pin on those coveted eagles. So we are looking forward to that. John, we're grateful for your service to this country, and we look forward to much more in the future. Let me turn this over so you can introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Generals, and I really appreciate that. Those are very kind words and somewhat unexpected. It is my distinct honor and pleasure tonight to introduce to you General George W. Casey, Jr., our current Chief of Staff of the United States Army. On April 10th, 2007, he was sworn in as the 36th Chief of Staff of the Army. But prior to that, he was the commander of multinational forces Iraq from July 2004 to February 2007. In that capacity, he was the commander for elements and units of over 30 different countries and obviously forces in the United States of America. Throughout his career, he has served in operational assignments in Germany, Italy, Bosnia, and Southwest Asia. He is commanded at every level from platoon to division in our United States Army. He commanded a mechanized infantry battalion in Fort Carson, Colorado, a mechanized infantry brigade in Fort Hood, Texas. He was the assistant division commander for the 1st Armored Division Commander in Bosnia and Germany, and was the 1st Armored Division Commander in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. He's also had several assignments on the Joint Staff. He was the commander of the Joint Warfighting Center J7 for U.S. Joint Forces Command. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry in 1970 from the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. He holds a master's degree in international relations from Denver University and was a senior fellow in the Atlantic Council of the United States. He and his wife of 37 years, Sheila, have 2 sons, Sean and Ryan, and they have 5 grandchildren. Now, as the commanding general of MNFI, as our Chief of Staff of the United States Army, as a division commander, he clearly has commanded thousands of soldiers. But to me specifically, he was my general officer, my commanding general in Iraq. And in that capacity, when I was in Tal Afar for all of 2006 and in Ramadi for early portions of 2007, he came and visited my units. He patrolled with my soldiers, and for the units prior to when I got there, he fought alongside of them in the important city of Tal Afar, which sits astride the communication lines from Syria through to Mosul and to Baghdad. And because of his personal involvement and obviously the efforts of all the soldiers and other service members in the United States forces and the coalition forces, we were very, very successful, I believe, in the city of Tal Afar, in Nineveh province in the northwest. And on October 18th, 2006, as a result of his personal relationships and his efforts in Tel Afar, we were able to turn over that city to the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Iraqi Armored Division, Brigadier General Kais, and a personal friend of General Casey's, Mayor Najim Abdullah al-Jubouri, who remains in control of that city, has never returned to coalition control over the past year, and clearly is a real success story, I think, for coalition forces in Iraq. Tel Afar, as I said before, remains under the control of the Iraqis, and I'm very happy for that, sir. And I told Mayor Najim, I still talk to him on email over Yahoo, that I was going to see you tonight, and he said to pass on his good wishes. So, without further ado, fellow Kennedy School classmates and the Harvard community, please join me in a warm welcome for our nation's Chief of Staff of the Army, General George W. Casey, Jr.
Thank you. It's always good to have the person introducing you, the guy you're going to promote the next day. It's a character check, John. I apologize for being late. We got weathered out of Logan and had to land at Hanscom, and with the great help and support of the Massachusetts State Police, we got here in about 25 minutes in the middle of rush hour. It's probably the only place I've ever been taken with a police escort that my mother would have been proud of. And she's probably happy that she doesn't have to come get me. I'd like to talk to you tonight about our Army. But in order to do that, I'd like to talk about how I see the future security environment and what future conflict looks like. And then a little bit about the Army, and then I'm happy to take your questions. I'm told I have 22 minutes. For context, it may not feel like it to you on a day-to-day basis, but the country's at war and has been for the last 6 years. At war against a global extremist terrorist network that is out to destroy our way of life. It's a reality. And John and I and others out here in the audience have fought men from that organization, and we understand it. Now, that said, as we look to the future, what I see and what most analysts that think about the future see is a future of what I call persistent conflict. And what do I mean by that? This is a good political science definition here. But I see it, persistent conflict, as a period of protracted confrontation among state, non-state, and individual actors that are increasingly willing and able to use violence to achieve their political and ideological ends. That's what's happening out there now across the world. And as I look at that and look to the future, I see several global trends that in the past we might not have paid much attention to, but now can create conditions that create breeding grounds for recruits for these global terrorist networks. What am I talking about? First of all, globalization. There's no question that globalization is having positive impacts on prosperity around the world. But it can also create have and have not conditions. And if you think about where globalization has been successful, by and large, north of the equator and the places where the poverty reigns, South America, Africa, Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia. Analysts estimate that in about 20 years, 2.5 billion people around the world will live in poverty. Not a good thing. Technology. Technology is another double-edged sword. The same technologies that are bringing information to people all over the world are being used by the terrorists to export terror around the globe. Demographics. Demographics, particularly in developing countries, are going in the wrong direction. The populations of some of these developing countries are expected to double in the next 15 to 20 years. And that will create even worse social conditions than exist there now. And the populations are increasingly moving toward the cities. Analysts estimate that by 2030, 60% of the world's population will live in cities. That bodes poorly for us as we think about future conflict. Resource competition, burgeoning middle classes in India, places like India and China, are going to drive up the demand for already scarce resources. And estimates are that with the research and development and the investment in the infrastructure, in the oil industry in particular, demand is still going to exceed supply here in the next decade. And as people turn to cleaner fuels, the places where 60% of the world's natural gas are, Russia, Iran, and Qatar. So we'll be drawn even more closely to the Middle East. The two that I worry about the most, frankly, are weapons of mass destruction and safe havens. There are over 1,200 known terrorist organizations around the world, and most of them are seeking weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, and even some type of nuclear weapons. And there's no question in my mind that when they get them, they'll attempt to use them against developed countries. And safe havens are areas where countries cannot, or won't control their own territory. And those areas, much like Afghanistan prior to September 11th, can be used as bases to export terror. So as I look to the future here, we're at war. The trends are going in the wrong direction. And we need to prepare ourselves for a decade or so of protracted confrontation. Now, as I look to that and I say, what's conflict in that environment going to look like? I said persistent conflict involves state, non-state, and individual actors. I personally believe that the likelihood of a major state-on-state confrontation isn't very likely in the near term. And I believe that most of the conflicts that we'll be involved in over the next decade or so will look more like Iraq and Afghanistan than they did like the initial assault into Iraq or Desert Shield and Desert Storm. That poses some problems for us. While we can never turn our backs on the ability to fight conventional war against other states because the consequences of losing a war are so great, which leads us in the military to say that we have to be able to fight across the spectrum of conflict, from conventional war all the way to peacetime engagement and everything in between. And that's a tough bill to fill. The other challenges, though, are more complex, are posed by non-state actors. And when you think about dealing with a non-state actor who, one, really isn't deterrable because there's nothing to hold hostage. He doesn't abide by the laws of war. He doesn't abide by common assumptions here about how you deal with the media. I mean, you can get on television and lies, and they do. It's a much more difficult and much more complex foe to fight. The second key element that add to the complexity of the future environments are the fact that we will fight among the people. And as we thought about this, one of the major differences between conventional and irregular warfare is in conventional war, you fight around the people. You bypass big cities. If you have refugees, you move them out of the way. You try not to hurt them. In places like Iraq and Afghanistan, we're fighting among the people every day, and that causes you to do some things that are fundamentally different. We need cultural skills and leaders that are culturally, I can't even say it, culturally astute. And that is not something that comes easy to our society, as isolated as we are. We'll probably be operating in urban areas, in big cities. There's a part of Baghdad that it was about 2 miles by 2 miles square. 2 million people live there. Very tightly packed houses, most of them no more than 3 stories high. Try to find a target in a place like that. Very difficult. Try to apply a precision munition in a place like that. It takes very precise intelligence and very precise munitions. We have to be able to leverage the other elements of national power, because the prize here is the population. And as you've heard probably many times about Iraq and Afghanistan, we won't win there militarily. We won't lose militarily, but we won't win until the Iraqis or the Afghanis are able to sustain and govern themselves. We're going to have a need to operate with indigenous forces. No great power in history, none, has ever succeeded in a counterinsurgency without a capable indigenous partner. We have to understand how to build capacity in foreign armies and police forces and know how to use them to help us accomplish what it is we're trying to accomplish. And all of this will take place under the watchful eye of the 24-hour media cycle. And it will be used by both sides, both positively and negatively. And that's not good or bad, it's just something that has to be dealt with. All of this, the complexity of fighting among the people, leads me to my third point, and that's our leaders. And the complexities of these environments that we'll be operating in future conflicts require leaders who are culturally astute, intelligent, agile thinkers that are capable of busting through these difficult and complex issues and leading their forces in a great deal of complexity. That's a tough challenge for everybody. The other thing about our leaders is in these types of environments, character becomes more important than ever. And we recently opened up a Center for Professional Military Ethics at West Point for precisely this reason. The situations our young men and women are confronted with are so complex that if you don't have a good moral compass to start off with, you can get into a lot of trouble real fast. So those are some thoughts on what future conflict looks like, and if you want to see it, you don't necessarily need to look to Iraq or to Afghanistan. You can look to Lebanon last summer 2006, when Hezbollah, a non-state actor, a terrorist organization, went toe-to-toe with the Israeli army. About 3,000 estimated Hezbollah operatives operating within the population denied, if not defeated, over 30,000 Israelis. Major blow, major setback for the Israeli military. How did they do it? They occupied cities and towns. They used the people. They used the people for intelligence. They used the people as shields. They used conventional and unconventional weapons. This is a terrorist organization that started the war with 13,000 rockets, some of them major conventional rockets. And they shot them not only at the Israeli soldiers, but the Israeli population. They used improvised explosive devices to channel the advancing forces into ambushes where they had the most modern anti-tank guided missiles that they deployed against the Israelis. 40% of the Israeli casualties came as a result of these missiles. They had unmanned aerial vehicles, just like we do, that they used for intelligence and they used to attack from. They had a cruise missile that they shot against an Israeli corvette in the Mediterranean Sea, damaging it severely. And their command posts were computers and encrypted cell phones, where they leveraged technology to their own advantage. And they used public television to get their message out. Now, if you want to look to the future, that's the kind of thing that I think we're going to be seeing. Now, as we look to that future, we do so with an army that is already stretched and stressed by 6 years of war. And I searched hard for a term to describe the state of the Army. And the term I came up with is that we're out of balance. And but what I mean by that is we're so consumed by the current mission that we cannot adequately sustain the volunteer force and prepare our forces to do other things. Now, out of balance isn't broken. It's not hollow. It's not bad. This is still a remarkably competent, resilient, and professional force. It's the best in the world, bar none. but we're too small to be doing what we're doing. And the President has directed us to increase our size. In about 3 more years, we will have increased our size by about 74,000 people. That's a good start. But to get where we need to get, not only do we have to increase our size, but the demand for the forces needs to continue to come down. And we expect to see that to happen over time. Now, what do I mean by out of balance? As I said, we're committed to the current at the expense of the future. I just had a hearing today with the Senate Armed Services Committee down in Washington. I was asked the question, what's the risk? What's the strategic risk because you're out of balance? And as I look at it, I believe the risk that we have right now for the next couple of years anyway is acceptable. As I said, I don't see a major state-on-state confrontation coming. And if we had to, we could change directions pretty quickly. Not as fast as we want to, but we could change directions pretty quickly. As I said, it's a combat seasoned force. They're the best in the world at what they do. Now probably, rightfully, you should ask, okay, how did you get there? You know, we've been at war for 6 years. How are we still in this position? When I took over this job, I had a team. I had one team, I said, go out and look at the future. Go out to 2020, tell me what the future looks like. They're the guys that came up with persistent conflict. Then another team, I said, go back 13 years in the other direction. Go back to 1994 and tell me what the country was doing and what the Army was doing. Well, what were we doing? We were basking in the glow of still basking in the glow of the great success in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. The wall had come down. We won the Cold War. We were searching the horizons for a peer competitor, not finding one. We were writing checks on the peace dividend as fast as we could write them. And oh, by the way, we were drawing the Army down by 300,000. And not only the Army, but the Central Intelligence Agency and the United States Agency for International Development, the folks that are helping us in this current fight. And so what I'm saying is, as you look to the future, we have proved to ourselves only one thing. We usually get it wrong. And so in the 90s, as we looked to what we thought was a peaceful future, we made some decisions that caused us to build an Army that wasn't ready for the challenges we faced on September 11th. Now we're at war. We see a future of persistent conflict. We need to ensure that our military, all of our armed forces, are properly resourced so that we have the forces that we need for the future. Now, how do we get out of there? The construct that I've been telling Congress here for several months, and I told the Senate Armed Services Committee today, what do we need to get out of here? 4 things. I call them imperatives. We need to sustain our soldiers and families. We need to continue to prepare our soldiers for success in the current conflict. We need to reset our soldiers coming back from conflict and their equipment so they're ready to go again. And then we need to continue our transformation because we are about halfway through the largest organizational transformation since World War II. And we're moving away from our Cold War formations and systems to build a full spectrum force that can deal with the challenges that we'll face in the 21st century. Let me just say a few words about each of those. Sustain. I called up one of my predecessors, General Shai Meyer. He was the Chief of Staff of the Army in the late 70s, early 80s that went to Congress and said, after the Vietnam War, the Army's hollow. He had to go to the President and report that only 4 of his 16 divisions were ready. And I said, how did you get there? What do we need to do? He said, it's all about the people. It's all about keeping the great men and women, particularly the leaders, the captains and the majors and the sergeants, who you invest a decade in preparing with the force. That's the most important thing. Our soldiers and our leaders are our ultimate asymmetric advantage over any enemy. Nobody can beat our men and women. We have to keep them with us. Second, prepare forces for the current conflict. We've made great strides in preparing our guys and gals for combat. We started off with about 100 up-armored Humvees to protect against the IEDs. There's over 18,000 there now. We're already moving toward the third generation of side protection for those, and we're putting in an entirely new vehicle here that's even more resistant to the IED attacks than the up-armored Humvees. Industry has kicked in, and we're having great success with that. We're committed to doing that, putting the tools in the right tools in the hands of our soldiers. Reset. This is a hard one. When people come back, other people tend to forget about them. But it's like riding a horse hard and putting them up wet. If you don't fix them, if you don't prepare them to go out again right when you get back, they're not ready the next time. It costs about $13 billion a year to reset a force the size that's in Iraq right now. And it's continuous because we're consuming our readiness as fast as we build it. I told this to Congress today. The money for reset is the difference between a hollow force and an agile force for the 21st century. It's going to take a lot of continued support from Congress and the American people on this. And lastly, transform. We're not a 21st century force. We're about halfway there. We need to continue our transformation. And for us, transformation is a journey. It's not a destination. Technology is going to continue to evolve, and we will continue to evolve with it. But we have to continue those efforts. Now, let me just close out here with a story. And I get questions about quality all the time. You read things in the newspaper that the quality of the Army has gone to hell. And it's not true, and I'll take questions on it later. But I was in Baghdad in August, and I had the opportunity to pin a silver star on a sergeant. And it was Sergeant Kenneth Thomas from Utopia, Texas. And Sergeant Thomas was out with his squad. They were supporting an Iraqi police patrol on the Tigris River. And as they were going down the river, they came under fire from one of the banks by a group of about 50 to 70 terrorists, insurgents. The Iraqi policeman who was manning the machine gun, which was the main weapon on the boat, abandoned his position. Sergeant Thomas jumped on the machine gun and began returning fire as the incoming rounds bounced off the steel plates that were protecting the machine gun, but he continued to return fire. They tried to push through, they couldn't. So they diverted to the opposite bank of the river. They got everybody out of the boat into a depression. Good news, they're not taking fire. Bad news, they can't get out. The squad leader looks at Sergeant Thomas and says, "Find us a way out of here." He charges up the bank under fire, only to find that his way out is blocked by a fence. He takes out his wire cutters and starts cutting the fence. The fence is electric. He continues cutting the fence while his glove is melting in his hand. He gets it open enough that he can pull the squad through. They get everybody through. The last guy gets hung up. He goes back knowing he's going to get shocked again. Gets knocked down, gets up, drags the guy through, organizes the squad, assaults a building to provide a covering position so they can be evacuated. For that, he was awarded the Silver Star. That's the kind of men and women that you have in United States Armed Forces. Remarkable folks. In this war, we in the Army have awarded 1 Medal of Honor, 9 Distinguished Service Crosses, over 400 Silver Stars, and over 6,700 other awards for valor. It's out of balance, but it's a magnificent force, and it's the best in the world at what it does. And with that, I will be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Okay, we pretty much know the routine, but just as a little bit of a review, we've got 4 mics, 2 down here and 2 up in those loges right there. General Casey said after spending 3 hours with the Armed Services Committee today, he can take any question in the crowd, and it'll be easier than what he did this morning. We'd like to keep it to a relatively short question.
Don't prove me wrong.
We don't care how difficult. And we encourage you to understand, of course, that civility is part of what we do, so we'd like to have good civil questions, and we'll have good civil answers. Let's start right here.
General Casey, next year is an election year, as you are no doubt aware. And there's a good chance that a Democrat will take the White House. How confident are you and is the Army in its ability to influence the thinking of whoever becomes the incumbent of the White House in terms of finishing the job in Iraq in a way that would be most satisfactory to you?
Well, first I used to tell the Prime Minister of Iraq not to take political advice from generals or military advice from politicians. So I won't comment on the first part of your question. How confident am I that we can influence people's thinking? I'm confident that we can have access and make presentations. Whether we can influence people's thinkings remains to be seen. We already, as you can imagine, there are already efforts going on in the Department of Defense to begin reaching out and talking to people advising candidates to talk about serious issues like the issues that I talked about tonight. And we will continue to do that, as will the other services, and I'm sure the other agencies of the government do the same thing. How successful we'll be, I don't know. That it?
Normally I'm allowed to ask one question.
A quick follow-up.
So, wouldn't it be a great shame if you thought the Army, the military was making great progress, was really beginning to gain a lot of traction in Iraq, only to have the political support taken away? I mean, I'd be curious to hear what, surely that would be hugely frustrating to anyone who's been
Sure.
involved. I mean, I know a lot of people in this room.
But I'll tell you, I'm sure you've seen this in your own country. What people say on the campaign trail isn't necessarily what they do once they get in the office, see the real intelligence, and are confronted with the very, very difficult choices of a president or a prime minister. And so, yeah, we think about it, but I mean, the people we deal with are professionals who accept their responsibilities as leaders of governments. And I've seen firsthand Democratic and Republican administrations during wars, and the people are about the same. I believe we'll get a leader who will do the right thing.
Let's move up here. One thing I forgot to add, please introduce yourself with a name and maybe your attachment to either Harvard or the Kennedy School
See your
or
brother?
wherever, please.
Hello, thank you for your wonderful speech. My name's Kathleen Brill. I'm a teacher at the Bridge program here at Harvard. And my question, as a civilian, I apologize, I'm not an expert, but I'm curious, looking ahead, someday we will leave Iraq, more or less, and my understanding is that when that does happen, we'll most likely need to have some troops there to secure the embassy and to help out with the civilian workforce who will be there during the transition. So I was wondering if you could enlighten me and tell me roughly how many troops do you think would be needed to do a mission like that? And also, do you think that that kind of work is best carried out by our own military or by a private organization such as Blackwater and why? Thanks.
Yeah, you're pretty savvy on these things. Those are good questions. The first point, I don't make the policy, but I do believe that we will have a military presence in Iraq for a while. It would be a heck of a lot smaller than it is now, because we'll continue to be providing support to not only the embassy, but also to the Iraqi security forces, both Army and police. Now, the size, I have my own views of what it might be, but I don't do that anymore, but it'll be probably 2/3 the size that we are now. I mean, it's 2/3 smaller than we are now. Now, the role of contractors. There's, I think, about 140,000 contractors in Iraq, and of that, 6,000 are security contractors, so a relatively small number. They do things like provide personal security that we don't necessarily do as a military. And frankly, it is not a task that I would like to devote a lot of Army forces to do. My experience with the security contractors has been candidly a mixed bag. Like any organization, they have some very solid professional folks. A lot of these folks are retired special forces or some other country's equivalent of special forces, senior non-commissioned officers. They're mature, stable individuals. Others, and I'll say the others are a minority, aren't. And that's where the problems come in. There's some work going on right now. I think there's a team actually over in Iraq right now talking to the security contractors, the embassy, and the military to figure out what's the right relationship there. So, long answer, but the bottom line is personal security is not something that we ought to devote, I don't believe it's something we ought to devote U.S. military to do on a large scale. That answer your question? Thank you.
Up here in the loge, please, Tafiq.
Hi, I'm Tawfiq Rahim, student here at the Kennedy School. Just a brief note before I ask my question. I hope the future of conflict does not look like Beirut 2006, where we had 1,000 Lebanese civilians die. I hope that the lessons are also learned from that conflict. One question I had was really building on the last the teacher's question, which is the U.S. presence in Iraq and how long it will continue. We've heard figures now of about 50 years, a long-term presence akin to that in Korea. Do you feel there's a fundamental misreading of what that type of statement and what that type of long-term commitment indicates to people on the ground? Mm-hmm. And do you believe that actually a longer-term presence will actually hinder from achieving a stable Iraq? And specifically, you look at now you have this peak during the surge. Definitely violence has gone down. Definitely there's been success. We've seen this type of thing with the capture and execution of Saddam Hussein, the elections. There's these temporary peaks which indicate to people that perhaps a U.S. presence is welcome. And maybe there's just a misreading that in the holistic view, fundamentally, a U.S. presence will always be seen as an occupying force.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, you know better than I that culture is based on respect. And a large armored force in an Arab country isn't necessarily a demonstration of respect. Now, any presence there will be decided in conjunction with the Iraqi government. And again, I'm not into policy at all, so I mean, I couldn't tell you how that's going to come out. In my discussions, and this is almost a year old now, there was a sense that they recognized they would continue to need assistance from us, but they wanted their security forces to be in charge and our security forces to be in there. In fact, with Prime Minister Alawi, it started out like this. Right now, coalition's in front, Iraqis in the back. We want to reverse that. And so that's the direction that we're ultimately headed. The second piece of that is they'd like us to be there, but they'd like not to see us in the long run. And so we were looking at how to move out to positions away from major cities where we could still respond if people needed assistance. So I think there will be a presence there, as I said, for a long time. It will be decided in conjunction with the Iraqi government based on their desires. But I do think it'll be some of a presence less visible and less involved as the security situation continues to improve and as Iraqi security forces continue to get better. Okay?
On the floor here.
Hi, my name is Ryan Taney. I'm a junior here at the college. First of all, I want to thank you and the other members of the military for their service. We all appreciate it very much. First of all, I just wanted to comment that there's been a perception over the past several years that the Bush administration has been trying to influence military strategy and military decisions as opposed to letting the career military servicemen and women make the proper strategic decisions based on their past experiences. I was wondering if you could comment on the interplay, or what you think would be the appropriate interplay between politics, specifically the administration, and the military.
That's a great question, and because there is a well-defined division of labor in the Constitution between the executive branch and between the military. As I read it, the executive branch develops the grand strategy, the strategy that takes into account the ends that the country is trying to achieve, provides the means to accomplish that, and also develops the how, the ways that they're going to do it. That strategy then gets communicated from the President and Secretary of Defense to the military. And the commanders on the ground then develop the operational strategy to accomplish their part of the overall strategy. And that is what needs to happen. Now, we get, we're asked, what do you think we should do? And frankly, with John Negroponte, we built a strategy in August of 2004. And we briefed that back up to the president. We were asked hard questions, which we should be asked hard questions about why we're doing this, why weren't we doing this? But it was approved, and we began to implement that. That process needs to take place. There's a wonderful book by Elliot Cohen called Supreme Command, and it talks about great political leaders in their dealings with their generals. It's Lincoln, Clemenceau, Churchill, and Ben-Gurion. And they're not all peaceful and happy. The issues that you deal with at that level when a nation is at war are huge, and they're complex, and there are always different ways to look at them and to accomplish your tasks. So there is an interplay between the civil and military leaders that has to take place. And if it doesn't take place, you don't get as good a product as you should. That answer your question? Okay, thanks.
Back here on the floor.
My name is Will Skinner. I'm a junior here at the college. You mentioned a future of quote-unquote endless conflict, sort of perpetual conflict, and the conditions that over the next 10 years that will seem to exacerbate these conditions. You also mentioned an idea of the need for more cultural sensitivity, which I agree has been lacking in many areas of our government and society in the past. My question is, I wonder if the military or the decision makers in the government have done any analysis sort of the causes that have led to this upsurgence in violence and aggression primarily targeted towards the United States. And it seems that if we cannot deter these sort of forces through military force, the only way out of this cycle of conflict is to try to address the causes that are leading to this aggression. So I'm wondering, has the military considered the past causes and considered what we can do to prevent them in the future?
That's a great question. And I didn't say perpetual conflict, I said persistent. But hopefully it won't be perpetual. We have looked at it, at the underlying causes of this. Probably not in the depth that we could. But this is an ideological struggle. I don't think there's any question about that. It's going to go on for a long time. For me, it's a battle that ultimately has to be resolved between moderate and extremist Islam. We're, as you suggest, this is not some place where the United States is going to come in and impose its will. That's not how it's going to happen. We can create the conditions and the opportunities for others to make the right choices. But as I said, this is an ideological struggle, and I think it only will ultimately be resolved when moderate Islam really outshines and overpowers extremist Islam.
Just a quick follow-up. I think it is very true that a change needs to be happening on both sides. Sort of in an idea of increased sensitivity towards cultures. Are there any specifics that we might do to sort of show what you said, that mutual respect, to show that that our forces are willing to make, and our government is willing to make changes in our foreign policy to match those that the other side would have to make as well?
Yeah, at the macro level, I was just reading a paper from Center for Strategic International Studies that talks about soft power and offers a way ahead that basically looks at forming alliances and reaching out to people and using the softer elements of power to gain influence and achieve our strategic objectives. That's okay to a point, and showing a softer side of the United States in the right places, I think, is exactly the way to go. But these are hard people, and they are not going to give up or go away easily. I mean, the terrorists, the Al-Qaeda are brutal. And soft power is not going to work on Al-Qaeda. Now, it'll work on the people who are supporting Al-Qaeda. And that's the target.
Back up to the loge.
Great. Hi, my name is Jessica Wrights. I'm an MPP2 here at the Kennedy School. And you spoke tonight about how warfare is changing, how there's more people in urban areas, how combatants are using civilians in warfare. And as you probably well know, Professor Sarah Sewell, who's here at the Carr Center for Human Rights, worked with General Petraeus on a counterinsurgency field manual. And I was wondering if you could comment on your general thoughts about the field manual, and also if you think it's feasible to implement it, if it has some good solutions for how warfare is now changing.
No, it does. It's a great document. I mean, it's a comprehensive document, but it's doctrine. It's not a cookie-cutter solution. In every situation you go into, you'll apply the principles that are in that manual differently. And the insurgency in Malaya is vastly different than the insurgency in Iraq, which is different than the insurgency in Afghanistan. They're all different. And frankly, one of the things you wrestle with as a leader in these environments is figuring out what those differences are. And you got to look to historical examples, but you also got to be astute enough to figure out what's different about that historical example that's not what you're facing right there on the ground. So it's a great manual, and it's widely used around the U.S. Armed Forces.
Back up here to the loge.
Hi, my name is Haley Peckett. I'm a student at MIT. You spoke about this fighting among people, and you also spoke about the need or the beginning to have ethical training and moral training to have culturally astute leaders. I believe these two are related. And I would like to think that the United States Army would have some sort of ethical problem with this new warfare fighting among people and need to take certain precautions. And my question is, can you train leaders ethically to be able to fight in these conditions, and how specifically would you do that?
Now, I believe we can, and we do. And we have been doing it and getting better at it over the last 5 or 6 years, based on the lessons we learned. Every time something happens, every time there's an incident at a checkpoint where an innocent civilian is killed, that incident is analyzed, and the lessons from that are passed out at the local level almost immediately. Leaders and soldiers are trained to report bad behavior. And in some of the things, you remember Abu Ghraib, it was a soldier who came forward and said, hey, wait a minute, this isn't right. But it's a big organization, 1 million people. You get some bad apples in there occasionally. So you train everyone you can on the rules of land warfare and instill in them a firm moral and ethical ethos. We talk about 8 Army values that we're grounded in, and that's inculcated in the soldier from the time he walks into basic training. And then you refine that in your preparatory training for different missions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Down here on the floor.
Sorry. My name's Kyle Hecht. I'm a sophomore at the college, and I'm also told that my grandmother is your mother's cousin.
I don't doubt it. My dad was from Alston and my mother's from West Roxbury, so there's...
I have no idea what that would make us. But you spoke briefly about how the current conflict is requiring our troops to become more integrated with people.
I don't know if I'm more nervous than you are.
With people who are culturally different than our own. And you spoke a little bit about how this is difficult because we're primarily an isolationist nation. I was wondering to what extent you think this schism exists between sort of our domestic policies of isolationism and our foreign policies of having to go abroad and fight these conflicts in other places, and whether or not it can be resolved.
Wow. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call us an isolationist country. We've had periods in our history where that has indeed been the case. I wouldn't necessarily put that label on us, especially today. I think you're always going to, I think we're, as Americans, always going to have a tension between the need to lead around the globe and the desire just to be left alone so we can get on with our prosperity. And I believe personally that we as a country have a moral obligation to assist and to lead the world and to, I believe, assist countries in realizing democracy. I firmly believe that. And I believe that the more democratic countries we have around the world over time, the better the entire society of the world will be. And I think we have a moral obligation to that as the only superpower in the world. Sorry I couldn't help you with your term paper.
Back down here on the floor.
Hi, my name is Lucas. I'm a junior at the college. Thank you for your time tonight. My question is, it was reported a few weeks ago that the Marines were advocating a separation of branches in Afghanistan and Iraq. So the Marines would be in Afghanistan, the Army would be in Iraq. What is your opinion on this, and do you think it would be efficient for both forces to do this?
Yeah, it wouldn't be efficient. It would require probably around 10,000 more Army forces to allow the Marines to do that. And the Commandant and I had a little sit down, and I shared my thoughts with him, and he understands where we are, and we don't agree. I don't think it's a good idea. I think they're having good success out there in Anbar province. That's a good thing. There are other places in Iraq that those Marine forces could be used without moving them all the way to Afghanistan.
So is it safe to say that it's probably not going to happen?
I don't know that. I don't know that. I'm not the decision maker.
Thank you for being here. My name is Emilian Papadopoulos. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. You began by saying it may not feel like it to us, but the country has been at war for 6 years, and I agree with that. I'm wondering what a greater mobilization on the home front would look like, what kind of impact positively that could have on the ground in Iraq.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I was up at West Point a week or so ago, and Doris Kearns Goodwin came up and spoke about Lincoln, and she'd also written a book on Roosevelt, and she talked about the measures that Roosevelt very purposely took to ensure that people across the country felt that they were part of the effort. You know, like selling war bonds at very small denominations and running the factories 24/7. I don't know that that would necessarily, that level of effort is necessarily required right now. But what are some other things that we could do that could get the country more involved? I mean, that's an interesting question. I frankly haven't thought a lot about that.
Thank you.
But I will now.
Excellent.
Up in the loge.
Hi, thanks for being here. My name is Monica Flemvan, and I just have a quick question for you. Because of the latest sectarian violence, there are a lot of voices raised to suggest divided Iraq between Sunni and Shia. In your opinion, do you think this will work to bring a stable Iraq? And another thing, if it's yes, would you think the neighbor countries will agree with this? Thank you.
I couldn't quite catch do I see the sectarian violence between the Sunni and Shia
Because of that, there are a lot of voices raised to suggest to divide Iraq between Sunni and Shia.
Oh, do I think that
Do you think this
partition's
will
a good
help
idea?
stable Iraq?
No, I think that would destabilize, I believe that would destabilize the country. There's, part of the challenge is you have a largely Sunni area in the south, a largely, I'm sorry, Shia area in the south, a largely Sunni area in the west and north, and in the Kurdish area up in the northeast. But you have Baghdad in the center. And I think a quarter of the population of the country lives in and around the Baghdad area. And that's where most of the sectarian violence in the country takes place today. And so you have to resolve that. The other problem with partition is you leave the Sunni part of the country out there with not much, without oil, without much access to anything but Syria and Jordan. So I don't think that's a good idea. The Iraqis that I talked to over the time I was there, they said that Sunni and Shia violence was not necessarily a normal state, but in the same breath they'll tell you that after 35 years of Saddam Hussein being suppressed by Baathists, who were largely Sunni, there's a lot of angst among the Shia population about the Baathists returning and about the Sunni returning to power. And so that is some historic anxiety and tension that it's just going to take some time to get over. But I don't think partition is a good idea.
Please, down here on the floor.
Yes, hello. I'm Taz Rajwani, a student here at the Kennedy School. General Casey, thank you very much for your service. You spoke about the moral obligation for promoting democracy. You spoke about another 10 years of conflicts, and that moderate Islam has to combat the extremists in order for this to slow down. What can we do about the situation in Pakistan and in Saudi Arabia? It doesn't seem like the US is really helping moderate Islam or democracy in those places. It sounds more like a perpetual war than a, what did you say?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. You know, what's going on, what's happening in Pakistan right now is obviously not what you would expect the democratic leader of a normal democratic country to do. But as I've watched several countries make the transition to democracy, and most of them are still trying to make it, I mean, you go through some stages. And I think sometimes we in America sit back and say, well, that's not right, we wouldn't do that, without having a good appreciation about what that leader is dealing with. And I wouldn't, frankly, personally, wouldn't want to have the challenges that President Musharraf has. I mean, they're huge. I believe in the long run he can move the country in the right direction and it'll be better. I'm not sure everything that happens along the way will be in the finest democratic traditions, but I think that's part of an evolution. Saudi Arabia is also another difficult issue for us. I mean, and that's not a place where we could go in and attempt to oppose our version of democracy. I mean, I don't think we would want to do that.
I guess I was thinking about how do we get the moderate voices of Islam to come up to combat extremism if we can't help them out in
you're seeing it
like that.
You're seeing it in Iraq. I mean, you saw it in Anbar province, where it started, where the leaders of Anbar province basically had been so abused by Al-Qaeda that they said enough. And that's happening not just in Anbar province, but in Baquba and other places around Iraq. And I think that is what I think you'll see, is more and more people will realize that there's a lot more to be offered in this world than what Al-Qaeda is trying to do. I mean, Iraq is a rich country. It's got oil, it's got water, it's got some of the most fertile land that I've ever seen. It's got an educated population. I mean, there's so much good that can happen there. My sense is that if people start feeling that the government is in fact representing them and that there is sufficient security, non-sectarian security, you will see the moderates come forward, and Iraq, I believe, can become a country with a democratic tradition. Won't be like us. It'll be an Iraqi model, but I believe they'll be able to protect themselves with some assistance from us and deny Iraq as a safe haven for terror. So that's the kind of thing that I think you'll see.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're going to take 3 more questions. The 3 folks that are at the mics, please.
Hi, my name is Eileen Overster, and I'm a student at the Kennedy School. It's widely believed that Iran is seeking a military nuclear capability. Do you believe, setting policy decisions aside, that Iran can be stopped? And if not, how should the U.S. prepare for a nuclear Iran?
Wow. I'm not sure you can set the policy issues aside on that one. I do believe I think the Iranians are trying to build a nuclear weapon. I do believe it would be a bad thing for that to happen. I also do believe that every diplomatic effort needs to be made to prevent that from happening. Whether or not that will be successful remains to be seen. But as you suggest, there are some pretty significant policy issues attached to that. And I do organize, train, and equip with the United States Army. And that's not one I think I'll tackle tonight. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Sid D'Souza, and I'm a second-year student at Harvard Business School. General Casey, thanks for being here, and thanks to you and the other members of the Armed Forces, current and former, and their audience for their service. My question has to do with one of the ingredients that you mentioned earlier in strengthening our ability to fight non-conventional wars. You'd mentioned strong indigenous armed forces or partner forces. And I was wondering, what proactive steps can our military take to improve those forces in areas that we may be engaged in now, but future areas? And second, what risks you might see in putting technology or other resources in the hands of armies that may not be prepared for those types of resources?
Yeah, that's a great question, because my experience has been they see our soldiers with it, and they say, I want that. And we normally try to accommodate them, but if you don't give them the maintenance training, and the first time it breaks, it sits off to the side and it's done. So we just have to watch that very carefully. I get a lot of questions about whether or not the United States Army should create a special organization that does nothing but trains foreign militaries. We have an organization whose primary job it is to do that, and it's called Special Forces. Now, we've had to augment the Special Forces capability with what we call transition teams, teams that work and live with Iraqi and Afghan security forces to help them. We've had to do that because of the scope of what we're trying to do. I mean, normally a Special Forces team could go in and have a big impact on a small country's armed forces. We're building armies of I think about 80 or 90,000 in the Afghan model and over 150,000 in Iraq. You can't do that with Special Forces. So we have set up a school in Kansas to train folks to go over and do that. And for right now, I believe that's sufficient. What's a little harder is we have to train the rest of our leaders to be comfortable operating with foreign armies. The Special Forces are comfortable doing that. Some of our more conventional folks are not necessarily at ease with that. And it's building that savvy into our conventional forces that will probably take longer. We're good trainers. We can train militaries. The thing I've been thinking about lately, though, is the biggest challenge I've seen in rebuilding, and I've seen it in Bosnia personally, I've seen it in Kosovo personally, and Iraq personally, and that's police and rule of law. And that was our biggest void in Iraq was rule of law institutions. And frankly, I've asked my MPs to look at, should we build a force that is capable of going out someplace and helping build a national police force, and perish the thought, but maybe have a battalion of lawyers that would go out and help restructure the country. Now, we need a good civil-military mix in that. But that seems to me to be something that might be more useful in this environment than just strictly trained in militaries.
Last question.
Hello, my name is Joshua Hollenberg, and I am a sophomore at the college. Let me thank you again for coming to speak to us today. Now, there's been a recent upswing in the conflicts between the Kurdish PKK, which often fight out of northern Iraq, the Turkish government, and the Turkish military. The Turkish government recently threatened to invade northern Iraq to go after the PKK, using as one of their excuses the war on terror rhetoric. Now, how do you feel about the push for an independent Kurdistan, which would encompass part of northern Iraq, part of Syria, and part of Turkey? And how do you think, if created, it would affect the situation in Iraq, the power situation in Iraq?
A greater Kurdistan?
An independent Kurdistan.
But it involves the Kurdish populations of all those countries you mentioned. That would probably have a hugely, my view, a hugely destabilizing impact on the region. Those Kurds are mostly citizens of all those countries that you mentioned, and I think it would have a very destabilizing effect on that. You know, on the first issue you mentioned about the Turks going into northern Iraq after the PKK, you know, this is an Iraq sovereignty issue, and the Iraqis are working it, their government working with the Turkish government. And that's what countries need to do. And I was frankly glad to see the leadership of Iraq going to Turkey and sitting down with them and trying to sort it out. That's what needs to happen. And then they can mount some type of military effort in there on the Iraqi side of the border to go after those folks. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
General
That's it?
Casey, I think that's it. We thank you
Okay.
so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your great questions. Keep asking hard questions.
It's been an honor having you here. Thank you so much for your service, for your candidness this evening. We all will be better off because of what we've been able to hear and absorb. And I want to reinforce one more time, thank everybody for coming tonight, and the questions were terrific this evening. Thanks very much.